He was fired for giving food to a woman on the street. Days later, he discovered who she was. Ethan Miller felt his hands tremble as he held the warm meal container. He knew it could cost him his job, but something stronger drove him. The woman on the sidewalk looked so fragile, so lost, that he simply couldn't walk past as if nothing was wrong. It had only been 15 minutes since Ethan had returned from his break when he saw the scene through the restaurant window. A shabby, elderly woman was sitting on the sidewalk in front of the establishment, shivering from the cold, despite it being an autumn afternoon in Chicago. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and she hugged her knees in a vain attempt to warm herself. The light rain falling made everything even more desolate. He looked around the kitchen. The manager, Richard Thompson, was in his office on the second floor, probably checking the security cameras as he obsessively did every day. The other employees were busy preparing orders for the lingering lunch hour. No one would notice if he was quick. Ethan grabbed one of the leftover meal containers from the buffet, filled it with rice, beans, a juicy steak, and salad. He put everything in a disposable bag, along with a juice and a bread roll. His heart pounded in his chest. Working at Grandma's Corner had been his only source of income for 3 years since he turned 22. Losing his job would be a disaster. But when he looked out the window again and saw the woman trying to shield herself from the rain with a soaked piece of cardboard, the decision was made. He went out the back door, walked around the alley, and approached the woman. Up close, she looked even more vulnerable. Her grey hair was disheveled, her face marked by deep wrinkles and an expression of weariness that went far beyond the physical. There was something in her eyes, however, that touched him strangely, a dignity that persisted despite everything. "Ma'am, please accept this," said Ethan, extending the bag. "It's warm." The woman looked up, surprised. For a moment she hesitated, as if assessing whether it was real or some kind of trap. Then her trembling hands reached for the bag. "God bless you, son," she murmured, her voice hoarse and choked. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to say something more, offer additional help, but he knew he needed to return before his absence was noticed. He gave a gentle smile and turned to go back to the restaurant. That's when he heard the thundering voice he knew all too well. "Ethan Miller, what do you think you're doing?" Richard Thompson was standing at the restaurant's main door, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his face red with anger. His small, hard eyes were fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made the young man feel like an insect about to be crushed. I was just... "Get in here now," ordered Richard, giving no chance for explanations. Ethan obeyed, feeling his legs wobble. As he passed through the door, he saw that all the employees had stopped what they were doing. The cook, Mrs. Ruth, the helper, Jimmy, the waitresses, Jennifer and Samantha, all looked at him with expressions mixing pity and embarrassment. Richard led him to the center of the main dining room, where there were still some customers finishing their meals. The manager made sure to speak loudly, as he always did when he wanted to publicly humiliate someone. "You stole food from the restaurant," accused Richard, pointing his finger at Ethan's face. "This is a serious act of dishonesty." "I didn't steal, Mr. Richard. I was going to pay for the meal at the end of the month, deducting it from my salary. That lady was hungry and—" "I don't care." Richard raised his voice even higher. "You don't have authorization to dispose of this restaurant's property as you see fit. Do you think I run a charity house?" Ethan felt his face burn with shame. The customers watched, some looking away uncomfortably, others observing the scene as if it were a spectacle. He saw Mrs. Ruth about to intervene, but Jimmy held her by the arm, shaking his head negatively. "Please, Mr. Richard, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." Richard took his wallet out of his pocket, grabbed some bills and threw them on the floor at Ethan's feet. "Here's what I owe you for the day's work this month. You're fired. Take your things and leave immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan looked at the bills on the floor, then at Richard's satisfied face, and finally at his co-workers, who didn't dare speak up. He knew they depended on their jobs as much as he did, and that intervening would risk their own livelihoods. With dignity, Ethan bent down and picked up the money. Not because he needed the humiliation of having to gather the bills from the floor, but because that was his salary, the fruit of his honest work. He put the bills in his pocket and walked to the back to get his belongings from the employee locker. When he returned with his worn-out backpack, the lady from the sidewalk had disappeared. Ethan looked around, searching for her, but there was no sign. Only the empty bag was there, swaying in the rainy afternoon wind. He started walking home, feeling the weight of reality fall on his shoulders. How would he explain to his mother that he had lost his job? How would he pay the overdue rent, the electricity and water bills that were already piling up, his mother's medical treatment, which even with the public system required spending on medications and tests? The walk to the small house in the South Side neighborhood took almost an hour. Ethan had no money for the bus fare, and in any case needed that time to organize his thoughts and prepare what he would say. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey, perfectly matching his mood. His mother, Catherine, was in the small living room when he arrived. She was a 58-year-old woman, but looked much older due to the difficult years and the illness that afflicted her. Diabetes and high blood pressure had taken their toll, leaving her fragile and dependent on a cane to get around. "You're early today, son," she commented, looking at the wall clock that read 3 in the afternoon. Ethan took the backpack off his back and sat on the worn-out sofa. There was no point in lying. Catherine always noticed when something was wrong. "I lost my job, Mum." Catherine's face twisted into an expression of worry and pain. She limped over and sat next to her son. "What happened?" Ethan told her everything, about the lady on the sidewalk, the meal, the public humiliation, the summary dismissal. Catherine listened in silence, her calloused hands holding her son's hands. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. "You did the right thing, Ethan," said Catherine when he finished. "Never regret helping someone in need. God sees everything and rewards acts of kindness. But what now, Mum? How will we pay the bills?" "We'll figure it out. We always have." Catherine stroked her son's face. "You're a good young man, and good people find their way. I'm sure of that." Ethan wanted to believe those words, but reality was harsh. In the following days, he went all over the city looking for work. He visited restaurants, snack bars, bakeries, markets, any place that might need an employee. He always carried a copy of his simple resume, hopeful that someone would give him a chance. But at every place he went, the answer was the same. When they mentioned Grandma's Corner as his last job, their faces changed. Some were embarrassed, others cold and distant. A fast food restaurant manager was more direct. "Richard Thompson called me last week, said you stole food from him and were rude when confronted. Sorry, kid, but I can't risk hiring someone with that record." Ethan was shocked. Richard hadn't just fired him in a humiliating way, but was actively sabotaging his chances of getting another job. The manager knew practically every restaurant owner and business proprietor in the area. His influence was significant, built over years of working at Grandma's Corner. He returned home that afternoon feeling defeated. Catherine tried to cheer him up, but even she was beginning to show signs of worry. The rent was due in a week, and they had no way to pay it. The groceries were running out. Her medications would need to be bought again in a few days. It was on a Wednesday morning, 10 days after the dismissal, that Ethan had an encounter that would change everything. He was in Union Square, in downtown Chicago, handing out resumes to passers-by and shopkeepers in a desperate attempt to find any work, when he saw a girl sitting alone on a bench. She must have been about 13 or 14, with messy brown hair, simple but clean clothes. What caught his attention was that she was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she looked at something in her hands. Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to be intrusive, but the image of that child crying alone touched something inside him. He approached slowly. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, startled, quickly wiping away her tears. It was then that Ethan saw what she was holding. A cloth handkerchief, hand-embroidered with golden initials on the corners. Something about that handkerchief seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. "I'm fine," she replied, but her choked voice belied her words. "Are you sure? Are you alone here? Where are your parents?" The girl hesitated, as if weighing whether she could trust him. Then, perhaps because Ethan had an honest and kind face, or because she really needed to confide in someone, she began to speak. "My mom is sick. Very sick. And I don't know what to do." The tears returned. "The doctors at the clinic said she needs tests that the public hospital doesn't have. Expensive tests. And I don't have the money." Ethan felt his heart tighten. He sat on the bench beside her. "I'm sorry to hear that. What's your name?" "Hannah." "Hannah, I'm Ethan. Look, I know we don't know each other, but where do you live? Is your mom alone right now?" Hannah shook her head. "A neighbor is taking care of her. I came out to try to get some money, but I didn't get anything." "What kind of tests does she need?" Hannah pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket and showed it. Ethan read the complicated names of the tests. He recognized some because his mother had needed similar ones. They were indeed expensive, totaling over $1,000. "And your dad? Can't he help?" Hannah's face closed off in an expression of anger that seemed out of place on a child. "We don't have a dad. I mean, he exists, but he left us a long time ago. When my mum first got sick, he just took off and took everything we had." Ethan felt a wave of indignation. What kind of man would abandon a sick wife and a young daughter? "Hannah, I wish I could help, but I'm going through a tough time too. I lost my job recently, and..." It was then that something clicked in his mind. The handkerchief Hannah was holding, the golden initials. He had seen that handkerchief before. That handkerchief. Where did you get it? "It was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mum before she passed away. It's the only valuable thing we have, but it's very important to her. I would never sell it." "Your mum, what is she like? Describe her to me." Hannah seemed confused by the question, but answered. "She has grey hair, she's thin, a bit short. She has wrinkles around her eyes because she used to smile a lot before she got sick." "Why?" Ethan felt the blood run cold in his veins. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Hannah, how long has your mother been sick this time?" "She got much worse in the last few weeks. She can barely get out of bed. Before that, she used to wander around the city. I think the illness messed with her head. She would go out and sometimes wouldn't remember where she was." "Wandering," Ethan repeated, processing. "Hannah, this is going to sound strange, but was your mother in front of a restaurant about 2 weeks ago? A restaurant called Grandma's Corner?" Hannah's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "She went out that day and came back with food. She said an angel had helped her. It was one of the last times she managed to go out by herself before she got completely worse." Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of all the people in the city, he had helped this girl's mother. And because of that act, he had lost his job and was now unable to really help them. "Hannah, I was the one who gave your mother the food that day." The girl was dumbfounded. "It was you? You're the angel she talked about?" "I'm no angel. I'm just someone who wanted to help. And I ended up losing my job because of it." Hannah started crying again, but this time out of remorse. "Because of me? Oh no, I'm so sorry." Hey, it wasn't your fault or your mother's." Ethan held her shoulders gently. "The fault was with my boss, who is a heartless man. You have nothing to do with it." They were silent for a moment, then Ethan made a decision. Maybe it was crazy, considering his own desperate situation, but he couldn't just turn his back on that girl and her mother. "Take me to your house, Hannah. I want to meet your mother." The apartment where Hannah lived with her mother was in an old building in the Lower East Side neighborhood. It was a humble place with peeling walls and a creaky staircase, but clean and organized as best as possible. Hannah opened the door to the small apartment on the 3rd floor, and Ethan followed her. The living room was tiny, with old but well-kept furniture. There was a worn-out sofa, a small coffee table, and framed photos on the walls. Ethan recognized Hannah in several of them, at different ages, always next to a woman he presumed was her mother. "Mrs. Dorothy," Hannah called, "I brought a visitor." A woman in her 60s appeared from the kitchen. It was the neighbor who was taking care of Hannah's mother. She had a kind face and tired eyes. "Hannah, dear, where were you? I was worried. And who is this young man?" Hannah looked at Ethan, realizing she didn't know his full last name. "Ethan Miller, ma'am. I met Hannah at the square, and she told me about the situation. I came to see if I could help in some way." Mrs. Dorothy studied Ethan for a moment, as if assessing whether he was trustworthy. Apparently satisfied with what she saw, she gestured for him to come in. "Her mother is in the bedroom. She's not doing well today. She barely managed to eat breakfast." Ethan followed her to the small bedroom. The woman lying in the bed was definitely the same one he had seen on the restaurant sidewalk. She was pale, her eyes closed, breathing with difficulty. Even sick and fragile, there was a dignity in her that persisted. "Ma'am?" Ethan called softly. The woman opened her eyes slowly. For a moment she seemed confused. Then her gaze focused on Ethan, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. You're the young man from the restaurant." Her voice was weak but full of emotion. "The angel who gave me food." "I'm no angel, ma'am. I just did what any decent person should do." "How did you find me?" "It was fate, I guess. I found your daughter in the square." The woman tried to sit down, but her strength failed her. Hannah rushed to help her, adjusting the pillows behind her mother's back. "My name is Elizabeth. Elizabeth Thompson," she said, and upon hearing the surname, Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "Thompson," he repeated, hoping it was just a coincidence. "Yes, I know it's the same last name as the man who manages Grandma's Corner, Richard Thompson. He's my ex-husband." Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Of all the possibilities, he never imagined that the woman he had helped was Richard's ex-wife. Suddenly, many things began to make sense in a disturbing way. "Does he know you're going through this?" asked Ethan, already imagining the answer. Elizabeth gave a bitter smile. "He knows, and he doesn't care. In fact, I think he even prefers it this way. The worse off we are, the better for him." "How can you say that about her father?" Ethan gestured toward Hannah, who was by the bed with a pained expression. "Because it's the truth," Elizabeth replied sadly. "Richard isn't Hannah's father. He never was. I was already pregnant when we got married. He agreed to take on the girl, but he always treated her as a burden. When I got sick 5 years ago, he used that as an excuse to leave and take everything that was ours." "But how?" Ethan was shocked. "You were married. He can't just have taken everything. He can when you're clever and unscrupulous. Richard forged my signature on documents, transferred assets to his name, had me sign papers when I was confused from the medication. By the time I finally understood what was happening, it was too late. He had put everything in his name and left me with nothing." "That's illegal. You could have reported him, sued him." Elizabeth sighed. "With what money, young man? Lawyers are expensive. And besides, Richard has connections. He knows important people. Who would believe me? A sick woman with no resources against him." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, processing all of that. The anger he felt toward Richard, which was already great, grew exponentially. The man wasn't just a cruel and unfeeling manager. He was a monster capable of abandoning a sick wife and a stepdaughter to take everything that belonged to the couple. "And the restaurant?" asked Ethan. "Has Grandma's Corner always been his?" "No. The restaurant was founded by my father, William Stone. He started the business 40 years ago, when I was just a girl. It was his dream to create a place where people could eat home-cooked food and feel like family." Elizabeth paused, her eyes growing distant with the memory. "When my father got old and tired, he passed the restaurant on to me. I always worked there since I was a child. I knew every recipe, every detail of the management. Richard was just an employee when we met, a charming waiter who knew how to talk smoothly." "And you fell in love with him," Ethan completed, seeing where the story was going. "I was a fool. My father never liked Richard, said he had cold eyes, but I didn't listen. I married him against my father's wishes. That created a distance between me and my father that was never truly healed." "Where is your father now?" Elizabeth averted her gaze, the pain evident on her face. "I don't know. After I married Richard, my father was so upset that he decided to travel. He said he was leaving the United States to see other places. He handed over the management of the restaurant to me and left. That was 15 years ago. I haven't had any contact with him since. He doesn't even know you're sick, that you're in need." "I don't know if he knows. I don't even know if he's still alive," Elizabeth's voice broke. "That's one of the things that hurts me the most. I hurt my father over a man who was worthless, and I never had the chance to ask for forgiveness." Hannah, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, approached her mother and held her hand. Don't think about that now, Mom. You need to rest. Ethan stayed there for a while longer, talking with Elizabeth and Hannah, learning more about their lives and their struggles. The more he listened, the more impressed he was with the resilience of those two women. Despite all the adversities, they maintained their dignity and supported each other. When he finally said goodbye, promising to return the next day, Ethan had a determination burning inside him. He didn't yet know how, but somehow he was going to help Elizabeth and Hannah, and if possible he was going to make Richard Thompson pay for everything he had done. In the days that followed, Ethan divided his time between looking for a job and visiting Elizabeth and Hannah. He used part of the little money he had to buy groceries for them and helped Hannah with household chores and caring for her mother. Mrs. Dorothy, the neighbor, proved to be a valuable ally. She shared more details about the family's situation, including how Elizabeth had ended up in that humble apartment. "It was 4 years ago," explained Mrs. Dorothy one afternoon, while preparing soup in the tiny kitchen. "I saw it myself when she arrived here with the girl. They only had a few suitcases of clothes. Elizabeth managed to rent this apartment because the owner is a good man who was moved by her situation." "And does she work?" asked Ethan. "She works when she can. She cleans some houses, sometimes sells sweets she makes here, but with her health it's getting harder and harder, and the poor girl has to help with everything." Ethan looked at Hannah, who was in the room reading to her mother. The girl had to grow up too fast, taking on responsibilities that shouldn't have been hers. It was on a Thursday, almost 3 weeks after being fired, that Ethan had a risky idea. He was walking through downtown when he passed by Grandma's Corner. On impulse, he decided to go in. The restaurant was in the busy lunch hour. Ethan saw Mrs. Ruth in the kitchen, Jimmy helping, the waitresses serving the tables. Everything seemed normal, but there was a heavy atmosphere in the air that hadn't been there before. Richard was in the dining room, supervising everything with his hawk-like gaze. When he saw Ethan enter, his face twisted into an expression of anger. "What do you want here?" he snarled, crossing the dining room in long strides. "I need to talk to you," said Ethan, keeping his voice firm despite his nerves. "We have nothing to talk about. Get out of here before I call security." "It's about Elizabeth." The effect was immediate. Richard's face paled for a split second before turning red with anger again. "How dare you mention that name here?" "She's very sick, Richard. She needs expensive tests. Her daughter is desperate." "She's not my daughter." Richard practically spat the words. "And what happens to that woman is none of my business. But you were married to her. You took everything that was hers, left her with nothing." "Mind your own business, you punk." Richard moved toward Ethan, stopping just inches from him. "You don't know anything. Elizabeth signed everything that needed to be signed. If she ended up with nothing, it's because she's incompetent and sick. You forged her signature. You took advantage of her being vulnerable to steal what was hers." Ethan's voice had risen, and now everyone in the restaurant was watching. Customers, employees, all witnessing the confrontation. "Prove it," said Richard with a malicious smile. "Go ahead and prove it." "Oh wait, you can't because it's not true. Now get out of my restaurant before I sue you for defamation." "It's not your restaurant," Ethan retorted. "It's her father's. William Stone founded this place. You're just an opportunist who took advantage of a sick woman." Richard grabbed Ethan by the collar of his shirt. "Listen here, you insolent brat. I told you to stay away from that woman and her brat. If you keep sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, you'll regret it. Let me go." Ethan pushed Richard, making the manager stagger backward. Jimmy and another employee had to hold Richard back, who was about to lunge violently at Ethan. The manager shouted threats while Ethan was pushed out of the restaurant. On the sidewalk, Ethan tried to catch his breath and calm his racing heart. His attempt to confront Richard had been a disaster. He had achieved nothing but confirming how despicable that man was. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. It was then that he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mrs. Ruth, who had come out through the back door. "Ethan, I need to talk to you, but not here." She looked around nervously. "Meet me at the square in an hour." Before Ethan could respond, Mrs. Ruth had already gone back inside. Confused but hopeful, Ethan decided to wait. He spent the next hour walking through the nearby streets, trying to process everything that had happened. When he reached the agreed-upon square, Mrs. Ruth was already there, sitting on a secluded bench. Ethan approached and sat beside her. "What's going on, Mrs. Ruth?" The woman, who was about 55 years old and had worked at Grandma's Corner for over 20 years, sighed heavily. "Ethan, I've known Elizabeth since she was a little girl. I watched her grow up in that restaurant, working alongside her father. She was a wonderful person, always kind to everyone." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know the truth. Richard really forged documents to take everything from Elizabeth. I saw when she was sick, confused because of the medication. He put papers in front of her and said they were for signing restaurant bills. But they weren't bills. They were property transfers, powers of attorney, everything he needed to take it all." Ethan felt a burning anger grow inside him. "You saw this and did nothing?" Mrs. Ruth lowered her head in shame. "I tried to warn Elizabeth, but she was already very ill at that time. And after I got scared, Richard threatened me. He said if I told anyone anything, he would fire me and make sure I never got a job in this city again. I have 3 children to raise alone, Ethan. I couldn't risk it." "I understand," said Ethan, and he truly did. Richard's coercion over people was real and effective. "But why are you telling me now? Because I saw what you did for that shabby old lady without even knowing who she was. And then I saw you get humiliated and fired for doing the right thing. You have courage, Ethan. You have the kind of courage I didn't have." "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know, but I think you need to know one more thing. Richard isn't just stealing from Elizabeth. He's stealing from the restaurant too." Ethan straightened up on the bench. "What do you mean?" "He's been embezzling money from the cash register for years. He falsifies invoices, charges extra from suppliers and pockets the difference, takes money directly from the cash register and alters the records. I've seen all this because I'm responsible for the kitchen and receive the supplier orders. The amounts they say were paid never match what Richard records in the books. Why doesn't the restaurant owner notice this? Because the owner has lived abroad for years and trusts Richard to manage everything. He receives monthly reports that Richard sends, but they're all falsified. The restaurant makes enough profit that the owner doesn't suspect anything." "This owner, is he Elizabeth's father, William Stone?" Mrs. Ruth nodded. "Yes. He left the United States many years ago, upset about his daughter's marriage. He went to live in Ireland, where he had some relatives. He knows nothing about what's going on. He doesn't know his daughter is sick and struggling. Doesn't know Richard stole from her. Doesn't know he's being stolen from too." Ethan processed all that information. It was a lot. Richard wasn't just a cruel manager. He was a multifaceted criminal. "How can I prove all this?" "You can't. Not without access to the restaurant records and the documents Richard keeps locked in his office. And even if you manage that, he has friends in important positions. It would be your word against his." "Then why did you tell me all this if I can't do anything?" Mrs. Ruth looked at Ethan with a determined expression, "Because sometimes knowing the truth is a start, and because maybe you can do something none of us could. Find William Stone and tell him what's happening." "But how? You said he's in Ireland. I barely have money to pay my bills, let alone travel to another country." "I know where he lives. I have the address. William and I were friends for many years. We exchanged a few letters after he left, before he stopped replying. He lives in a place called Dublin, a city in Northern Ireland." Mrs. Ruth took a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Ethan. It was a handwritten address, with careful penmanship. "What do you want me to do with this?" "Write him a letter. Tell him everything. About Elizabeth, about the granddaughter he doesn't even know exists, about Richard. William is a fair man. If he knows what's happening, he'll come back." Ethan held the paper as if it were a precious treasure. It was a small hope, but it was hope. "I'll do it. I'll write it today. Good luck, Ethan, and please don't mention my name in anything. I still need this job." They said goodbye, and Ethan returned home with his mind buzzing with thoughts. That night, after making sure his mother had taken her medications and was comfortable, he sat at the small living room table with paper and pen. Writing the letter was harder than he imagined. How to explain that whole complex situation to a man he had never seen? How to convince him he was telling the truth? Ethan started and restarted several times, tearing up sheet after sheet. Finally, on the fifth attempt, he managed to write something that seemed adequate. He explained who he was, how he had met Elizabeth, her and Hannah's situation, Richard's actions, all clearly and respectfully. At the end, he left his address and contact number in case William wanted to know more. The next day, Ethan went to the post office and sent the letter via International Express mail. It cost him almost half of the little money he had left, but he felt it was worth it. It was a shot in the dark, but sometimes shots in the dark hit the target. The weeks that followed were difficult. Ethan kept looking for a job without success. The bad reputation Richard had spread about him was too effective. Some places wouldn't even interview him when they knew where he came from. His mother, Catherine, had a worsening in her condition. The medications had run out and they had no money to buy more. Ethan had to sell his cell phone, the only valuable item he still owned, to get the necessary money. Elizabeth's situation was also deteriorating. Hannah showed up at Ethan's house one night, desperate, saying her mother had fainted and they had to call an ambulance. Elizabeth was admitted to the public hospital, where the doctors confirmed she urgently needed specialized tests, plus specific medications the public system didn't provide. Ethan felt powerless. How could he help when he himself was sinking? He visited Elizabeth in the hospital and found her even more fragile, connected to machines, breathing with difficulty. Hannah was by the bedside, holding her mother's hand, trying to be strong, but her swollen eyes betrayed how much she had cried. "Is she going to be okay?" Hannah asked when Ethan approached. "The doctors will do their best," Ethan replied, not wanting to give false hope. Elizabeth opened her eyes and saw Ethan. You're a good young man," she murmured. "Don't leave Hannah alone, please. If anything happens to me—" "Don't talk like that," Ethan interrupted. "You're going to be okay. You just need to have faith." But faith alone didn't pay for tests or medicine. Ethan knew that, and the feeling of helplessness was suffocating. It was on a Saturday morning, almost 2 months after sending the letter to Ireland, that something unexpected happened. Ethan was at home trying to fix a leak in the bathroom to save money on calling a plumber when he heard insistent knocks at the door. He opened it and found an elderly man, tall and thin, with completely white hair and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing elegant but understated clothes and held a noble wooden cane. "Ethan Miller?" asked the man, with an accent that mixed Irish and American English. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "My name is William Stone. I received your letter." Ethan froze for a second. Then he opened the door wider in a hurried gesture. "Mr. Stone, please come in. I wasn't I didn't know if I'd get a response." William entered the simple house, looking around with a neutral expression. Ethan felt ashamed of the place's humility, the old furniture, the walls that needed painting. "Sorry for the mess. "No need to apologize, son," William interrupted kindly. "I received your letter 3 weeks ago. It took me this time to organize the trip and get here. I need you to tell me everything, every detail." They sat in the small living room. Catherine, who was in the bedroom, appeared limping with her cane, curious about the visitor. Ethan quickly made the introductions, and his mother, sensing the importance of the conversation, discreetly returned to the bedroom. Ethan told everything, from the day he saw Elizabeth on the sidewalk to her current situation in the hospital. He talked about Hannah, about Richard, about Mrs. Ruth's revelations, about everything he had discovered and lived through in the past few weeks. William listened in silence, but his face changed expression as the story progressed. When Ethan mentioned that Elizabeth had a daughter, the old man's eyes filled with tears. "A granddaughter. I have a granddaughter, and didn't even know," he murmured. "Hannah is an amazing girl, Mr. Stone. Strong, brave, taking care of her mother even though she's just a child. She has Elizabeth's eyes and the same kindness in her heart." "And my daughter, is she in the hospital now?" "Yes. She's very ill. The doctors say she needs urgent tests and special medications, things that cost a lot of money." William stood up, leaning on his cane. "Take me to her. Now." "But Mr. Stone, maybe you should rest from the trip, prepare—" "No!" The old man's voice came out firm and determined. "I lost 15 years of my daughter's life because of pride and hurt. I'm not going to lose another second. Take me to her now, please." Ethan nodded. He called his mother to let her know he was leaving, and the two set off for the hospital. On the taxi ride, William insisted on paying. The old man told his own story. "When Elizabeth announced she was going to marry Richard, I objected," William began. "I saw in that man a falseness that bothered me. I tried to make my daughter see, but she was in love. She thought I was a controlling father, trying to ruin her happiness. You just wanted to protect her." "Yes, but I was too harsh. I gave her an ultimatum. Either she reconsidered the marriage or I would distance myself. It was the worst decision I ever made. Elizabeth chose the marriage and I, proud and hurt, carried out my threat. I handed over the restaurant management to her and left for Ireland." "Why Ireland?" "My mother was Irish. When she passed, she left me a small house in Dublin. I thought I'd stay there a few months, clear my head. I ended up staying 15 years. But you never tried to contact Elizabeth during that time?" William lowered his head, ashamed. "In the first few years I sent letters. She never replied. After a while I stopped sending them. I assumed she was happy with her life and didn't want anything to do with the father who abandoned her. I was wrong. I should have tried harder. I should have come back to see how she was doing." They arrived at the hospital and went up to the room where Elizabeth was. Hannah was there, sitting in the chair next to the bed reading a book to her mother who slept connected to machines. When the girl saw Ethan come in, her face lit up a bit. But then she saw the elderly man behind him and became confused. "Ethan, who is this gentleman?" Before Ethan could answer, William stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the girl. "I'm your grandfather, child." Hannah's eyes widened, looking from William to Ethan and back to William. My grandfather. My mother's father. But I thought that I didn't care, that I had abandoned your mother." William approached slowly. "I didn't know, child. I didn't know you were suffering. I didn't know you existed. But I'm here now, and I promise I'll fix everything." Hannah began to cry. They were tears of relief, of hope, of so many pent-up emotions. William hugged her, and for the first time in weeks, the girl allowed herself to be just a child needing an adult's comfort. The movement woke Elizabeth. She opened her eyes slowly, still dizzy from the medication. Her gaze wandered around the room until it landed on William's figure. For a moment there was confusion, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Dad." Her voice was a weak whisper. William stepped away from Hannah and approached the bed. Tears streamed freely down his wrinkled face. "My daughter. My dear daughter, forgive this old fool. Forgive. Dad, you're here. For real. I am my daughter. And I'm not leaving anymore." Elizabeth tried to raise her hand and William held it, squeezing it tenderly. How did you know?" "It was Ethan. He wrote to me. Told me everything." Elizabeth looked at Ethan, who was in the corner of the room, trying to give privacy to that family moment. Her eyes were full of gratitude. "You did this? For us?" "It was the right thing to do, Mom," replied Ethan. William spent the following hours organizing everything. He called private doctors he knew, asked them to transfer Elizabeth to a better hospital, arranged the necessary tests urgently, ensured she would receive the best treatment available. Ethan watched everything with a mix of relief and admiration. It was like seeing a storm calm down, like seeing the sun appear after days of rain. Elizabeth and Hannah would finally have the help they so desperately needed, but there was still one matter pending, and William hadn't forgotten it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. A few days later, when Elizabeth was better and had all the necessary tests done, William called a meeting in his daughter's small apartment. Present were Ethan, Elizabeth, who had been discharged with the recommendation to continue treatment at home, Hannah, and Mrs. Dorothy, the neighbor who had helped so much. "I have some things to say and decisions to make," began William, standing in the small living room. First, about the restaurant. Elizabeth, Grandma's Corner is rightfully yours. I passed it to you because I knew you loved that place as much as I did. What Richard did was a crime. But Dad, he forged documents. Everything is in his name now. There's no way to prove it, Elizabeth said sadly. There is a way, William smiled. I never officially transferred the ownership of the restaurant to you, Elizabeth. The restaurant is still registered under my name. Richard might have managed to put some things in his name, but the main property, the building where the restaurant operates, has always been mine. Richard is just a manager, always has been. So he couldn't have stolen the restaurant? Hannah asked, confused. Exactly. He forged documents to gain control over bank accounts, some equipment, but the restaurant itself never stopped belonging to the Stone family. Elizabeth seemed unable to believe it. So all this time, Richard was pretending to own something that was never his. And now it's time for him to find out. What are you going to do, Dad? I'm going to the restaurant tomorrow, and I'm going to make some necessary changes. The next morning, William entered Grandma's Corner for the first time in 15 years. The restaurant was open. The breakfast hour still had a few customers. Everything seemed the same and different at the same time. The walls had been repainted. New pictures decorated the space, but the essence was still the same. Richard was at the cash register, checking the morning receipts when he saw the elderly man enter. At first, he didn't recognize him. Then, when William approached, Richard turned pale, as if he had seen a ghost. William? His voice came out thin, disbelieving. Richard Thompson. It's been a while. What are you doing here? I thought you lived in Ireland. I did, but I received worrying news about my restaurant and decided to come back to see for myself. Your restaurant? Richard tried to laugh, but it came out nervous. This restaurant is mine. Elizabeth transferred everything to me when we separated. Is that so? How interesting. Because according to my records, this building and this establishment are still registered in my name, always have been. Richard's face turned red. That's not possible. I have documents. Forged documents, you mean? Documents you made Elizabeth sign when she was sick and vulnerable? You can't prove anything. I can't? William took a folder from inside his coat. I have all the original property records here. I also have a copy of the financial reports you've been sending me all these years, and an audit I had done in the last few days. The numbers don't add up, Richard, not even close. Richard realized he was cornered. The other employees had stopped working and were watching the scene. Some customers were also paying attention. You can't just show up here after 15 years and, yes, I can, this is my restaurant, always has been. You're just a manager, Richard. A manager who has 3 minutes to gather his personal belongings and leave. You're firing me? No. Firing would be too lenient for what you've done. You stole from me, stole from my daughter, took advantage of a sick woman, abandoned a child. You should be grateful I'm not involving the authorities, but only because I don't want to cause more suffering for Elizabeth and Hannah with a long and painful lawsuit. I won't leave like this. I have rights. I'll sue you. Sue me based on what? On forged documents? Go ahead. It will only speed up your own downfall. William turned to the employees who were watching open-mouthed. Mrs. Ruth, Jimmy, Jennifer, Samantha, you all still have your jobs. Nothing changes for you, except that now you'll have a manager who treats you with respect. Richard was trembling with anger, but he knew he had lost. He tried to maintain his composure as he went to his office to get his belongings, but everyone could see he was shattered. When he returned with a cardboard box containing his personal items, William was waiting at the door. One last thing, Richard. If I find out you're spreading lies about my daughter, my granddaughter, or about Ethan Miller, there will be legal consequences. Understood? Richard didn't answer, just left slamming the door. The employees burst into excited murmurs. Mrs. Ruth had tears in her eyes. Mr. William, I can't believe you're back. I'm back, Ruth, and there's a lot of work ahead. First, I want to speak with all of you individually. I need to understand how things have been running here. During the following weeks, William dedicated himself to restoring Grandma's Corner to its former glory. He discovered the full extent of Richard's embezzlement, the fake accounts, the suppliers who were overcharged with the difference going into the manager's pocket. It was worse than he had imagined, but beyond correcting the financial and administrative problems, William made sure to restore the soul of the restaurant too. He brought back old recipes that had been abandoned, renovated the space to make it more welcoming, and most importantly, changed how the employees were treated. And most importantly, he called Ethan for a private conversation. "Ethan, I want to offer you the manager position at the restaurant," William said one afternoon. Ethan nearly dropped the coffee he was drinking. "Mr. Stone, I don't have the experience for that. I was just a kitchen helper." "You have something more important than experience. You have character. You have compassion. I saw how you acted with Elizabeth without expecting anything in return. I saw how you cared for Hannah, how you wrote that letter to me knowing it might lead nowhere. That's worth more than any experience. But what about Elizabeth? The restaurant is hers. She should be the manager. Elizabeth will be the owner, as she always should have been. I'm officially transferring the property to her. But she's still recovering, and even when she gets better, I don't know if she'll want to work in direct management. She always preferred the creative side, the recipes, customer service." "I don't know if I can," Ethan admitted honestly. "No one knows if they can until they try, and you won't be alone. I'll stay here for a few months helping, teaching you everything you need to know. Mrs. Ruth will support you in the kitchen, and Elizabeth will be here whenever you need help." Ethan thought for a long moment. It was an incredible opportunity, scary, but incredible. "All right, I accept. I'll do my best." "I know you will," William smiled. "And there's one more thing. I discovered something in the last few days that I need to tell you." "What is it?" William pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "While organizing the restaurant's old files, I found employee records from decades ago, and I found your mother's name." Ethan straightened up, surprised. "My mother, she worked here." "She did. Over 25 years ago, she was a waitress, one of the best we ever had. Catherine Wilson, right?" "Yes. But she never told me she worked at Grandma's Corner. Maybe because her departure was complicated. According to the records, she quit suddenly, said she was leaving town. She was pregnant. With you, I imagine." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "She got pregnant without being married. My father, she never told me much about him. Only that it was a relationship that didn't work out." William was quiet for a moment, seeming to struggle with something internally. Then he sighed deeply. "Ethan, I think I need to tell you something. Something I discovered these past few days while looking at old photos and doing the math." "What is it, Mr. Stone?" "I knew your mother. I knew her very well. We were close. And when she left, I didn't understand why. She just disappeared without any explanations." Ethan began to understand where this was going, and his heart raced. "Are you saying that—" "I'm saying it's possible, very possible, that I am your father, Ethan." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan didn't know what to feel. Shock, anger, confusion, all at once. "Why did my mother never tell me?" "I don't know. Maybe because I was so focused on the restaurant back then that I missed the signs. Maybe she thought I wouldn't take it well. Or maybe she just wanted to protect you from a complicated situation." "I need to talk to her." Ethan stood up. "Of course, go. And Ethan, whatever your mother says, this doesn't change what I think of you. You are an admirable young man." Ethan practically ran home. He found Catherine in the kitchen preparing lunch. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Catherine saw the expression on her son's face and knew it was serious. "What happened, son?" "William Stone. Is he my father?" Catherine dropped the spoon she was holding. Her hands were shaking. After a moment that seemed to last forever, she nodded. "He is." "Why did you never tell me?" Catherine sat down heavily in a chair. "Because I was afraid, Ethan. William was my boss. He was an important man. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I thought he would think I was trying to take advantage of the situation, to get money from him. Or worse, that he would force me to do something I didn't want to do." "You could have given him the chance to decide." I know. Catherine was crying now. "It was selfish of me. but I was 23, I was scared and alone. My parents had passed away not long before. I had no family. I made the decision I thought was best at the time. I went to another city. Had you raised you the best I could. He had the right to know he had a son. He did, and I was wrong to hide it. But Ethan, look at everything you've become. A good, honest, compassionate man. You became this way because of who you are, not because of who your parents are. Ethan sat down next to his mother. He was still processing everything, but he could see the genuine pain and regret on her face. William wants to do a DNA test to confirm, said Ethan. Are you willing? I am, and I'm willing to apologize to him too, for everything. The tests were done a week later. The result confirmed what everyone already suspected. William Stone was the father of Ethan Miller. The meeting between William and Catherine was tense at first. There was hurt, regrets, unspoken words accumulated over 25 years. But gradually, with honest conversations and many tears, they began to build a bridge over the chasm that separated them. William did not blame Catherine for the decision she had made, although he made it clear he would have liked to have been present in Ethan's life. Catherine apologized repeatedly, acknowledging that she had deprived both father and son of an important relationship. And in the middle of all this was Ethan, trying to process the fact that his life had completely changed in a matter of weeks. Not only had he discovered who his father was, but he had also gained an extended family that included a grandmother in Elizabeth, who technically wasn't a blood relative, but everyone treated her as such, and a young aunt in Hannah. The transformation of Grandma's Corner continued. With Ethan as manager and William as a guide, the restaurant began to prosper in a way it hadn't for years. Elizabeth, recovered and with her health finally stabilized thanks to proper treatment, began to work a few hours a day, mainly developing new dishes and training the kitchen staff. Hannah, in turn, seemed to have blossomed. The girl who once carried the weight of the world on her shoulders could now just be a teenager. William made sure to enroll her in a good school, and for the first time in her life, Hannah had friends her own age and opportunities she had never dreamed of. But not everything was perfect. The sudden management change and Richard's humiliating departure sent ripples through the community. Richard, bitter and resentful, tried to spread lies about William and his family. He even went to some local businesses trying to convince other merchants that William had stolen his restaurant. However, the truth has a way of coming out. Some of the suppliers Richard had deceived over the years began to speak up. Former employees he had mistreated shared their stories, and gradually the community began to understand the kind of person Richard really was. Richard himself ended up having to leave Chicago. Jobless, with no reputation, and with several people threatening lawsuits over money he owed them, he simply disappeared one night. Some said he had gone to Wisconsin, others mentioned New York. Nobody knew for sure, and frankly nobody cared. During this period, Ethan also discovered something about himself. He had a talent for management. With William's guidance, he quickly learned about people management, financial control, and relationships with suppliers and customers. What seemed scary at first became natural with practice, but more important than professional success was personal growth. Ethan learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most difficult moments. If Richard hadn't fired him, he would never have met Elizabeth and Hannah. If he hadn't met them, he would never have written to William. If he hadn't written to William, he would never have found out who his father was. It was as if every difficult piece of the puzzle had a purpose, leading to something bigger. One afternoon, about 4 months after William had returned to the United States, he called a meeting at the restaurant after hours. Present were Elizabeth, Hannah, Ethan, Catherine, Mrs. Ruth, and all the other employees. I want to thank all of you, William began, standing in the middle of the dining room. These months have been a lot of work, but also a lot of joy. We managed not only to save the restaurant, but to make it better than ever. Everyone applauded. And now the time has come to formalize some changes. Elizabeth, as it has always been my wish, Grandma's Corner is officially yours now. I've completed the legal transfer of ownership. The restaurant is yours. Elizabeth had tears in her eyes. Dad, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. It's only fair. And Ethan, you remain as manager for as long as you want. I trust you completely. Thank you, William. I mean, Dad? Ethan was still getting used to the term. And there's one more change. William smiled. I've decided I'm not going back to Ireland. I'm staying here in the United States. I missed many years of my family's life. I'm not going to waste any more time." It was Elizabeth who stood up and hugged her father first. Then Hannah joined in, and then Ethan and Catherine. Soon it was a group hug, full of emotion and happy tears. Mrs. Ruth couldn't hold back and started crying too, and Jimmy had to offer her a napkin. The other employees exchanged glances with emotional smiles. But amid the celebration, Ethan noticed that Hannah was quiet, staring at a fixed point with a thoughtful expression. He approached her after the group hug broke up. "Are you okay, Hannah?" The girl looked at him. "It's just... I was thinking. All this happened because you gave food to my mom that day. A simple act of kindness changed so many people's lives." Ethan smiled. "That's true. Sometimes we don't understand at the moment, but small gestures can have big consequences." "I want to be like that when I grow up," Hannah said with determination. "I want to help people. I want to make a difference." "You already make a difference, Hannah, every day." In the following weeks, Grandma's Corner implemented a change that Ethan had suggested and everyone had supported. A program where people in vulnerable situations could receive a free meal. It wasn't empty charity, but an initiative designed to offer dignity along with food. The idea was simple. People who needed help could come to the restaurant, and in exchange for a few hours of volunteer work, like helping with cleaning, organizing, or even just sharing their stories and talking with others, they would receive a complete and nutritious meal. The community embraced the initiative. Some regular customers began to prepay for meals that would be served to people in need. Others donated groceries. The program grew organically, transforming Grandma's Corner into more than a restaurant. It became a community center, a place where people found not just food, but also compassion, conversation, and connection. One of the first people to benefit from the program was an elderly man named Frank, who had been living on the streets for 5 years after losing his wife and home. Mrs. Ruth recognized him as an old friend of her late husband and made a point of personally caring for him. Over time, Frank began helping in the kitchen, and his skill with spices impressed everyone. Eventually, Elizabeth invited him to work officially at the restaurant. Stories like Frank's repeated themselves. Every person who went through the program had a story, had dignity, had potential, and Grandma's Corner was there to remind everyone of that. During this period of transformation, Ethan also worked on rebuilding his relationship with William. It wasn't simple to accept a father at 25, especially when he had grown up his whole life without that figure. There were moments of discomfort, of not knowing how to act, of wondering what it would have been like if he had grown up knowing his father. But William was patient and respectful. He didn't try to force anything, didn't demand to be called Dad if Ethan didn't feel comfortable, didn't try to compensate for the lost years with grand gestures. Instead, he simply was present. He was there for conversations when Ethan needed. He was there to teach about the business. He was there for advice when asked. And with Catherine, William also built a genuine friendship. There was no more romance between them, that was clear to both, but there was respect and affection. They could talk about Ethan, share worries and joys about their son, work together to support him. Catherine, in turn, saw her health improve significantly. With access to better treatments that William insisted on paying for, and which Catherine reluctantly accepted after much insistence, her diabetes and blood pressure became controlled. She began working part-time at the restaurant, helping with organization and service, feeling useful and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. The relationship between Elizabeth and Hannah also evolved. Elizabeth, no longer overwhelmed by illness and the constant need for survival, could finally be the mother she had always wanted to be. They talked more, laughed together, shared dreams and plans for the future. Hannah went back to being a normal teenager, concerned with school, friends, and all the typical things of her age. But she never forgot the hard times, and that made her more empathetic and mature than most people her age. It was on a Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after William's return, that there was a small celebration at the restaurant. It was Hannah's birthday, as she was turning 14 and everyone wanted to do something special. The restaurant was closed to the public for a few hours, and the family and close staff gathered for a simple but meaningful party. There was a cake that Elizabeth had made herself, colourful decorations that Hannah had chosen, and lots of laughter and conversation. Ethan was watching the scene with a smile on his face. Hannah was the centre of attention, opening presents and thanking everyone with genuine enthusiasm. Elizabeth was beside her, radiant with health and happiness. William was talking with Catherine, the two of them laughing at some joke. Mrs. Ruth, Jimmy, and the other staff were moving around, all part of that extended family that Grandma's Corner had become. "What are you thinking about?" asked a voice beside him. Ethan turned and saw Samantha, one of the waitresses. She was his age, and they had become close friends over the last few months. "I was thinking about how life can change so quickly. 6 months ago I was desperate, without a job, without hope, and now you're managing a successful restaurant, found out who your father is, and helped bring a family together," Samantha finished. "Not bad for 6 months." Ethan laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds like a fairy tale." "Maybe it is, but it's a fairy tale you helped create. That day you gave food to Elizabeth, you didn't have to do that. You could have ignored her, you could have been afraid of losing your job, but you chose to do the right thing." "And I lost the job anyway," Ethan recalled with an ironic smile. "But you gained so much more. You gained a family, a purpose, and the certainty that acting with kindness is worth it." Ethan looked again at the party, at all those people who were now part of his life. "You know, I always wondered why bad things happened to me, why my mother had to be sick, why I never knew my father, why money was always tight. But now I understand that all those hardships prepared me for this moment." "How so?" "Because I knew what it was like to struggle. I could understand the suffering of Elizabeth and Hannah. Because I grew up without a father, I could appreciate the value of having William in my life now. Because I knew hardship, I can value kindness. Everything has a purpose, even when we can't see it at the time." Samantha smiled and gently touched his arm. "You're wiser than you look, Ethan Miller." The party continued through the afternoon. Hannah blew out the candles on the cake, making a silent wish. When someone asked what she had wished for, she just smiled and said, "I wished that all the people here today would always be happy. You changed my life." It was a simple moment, but deeply touching. There were tears, hugs, and many affirmations of love and gratitude. When the party ended and everyone was helping to clean up, William called Ethan to talk privately in the office. "I wanted to talk with you about the future," said William. "The future?" "Yes, you're doing an excellent job as manager. The restaurant is more profitable than ever, the staff is happy, the customers love the place. But I want to know what you want for your future." Ethan thought for a moment. "I'm not sure. I'm happy here, doing what I do. But sometimes I wonder if I should study more, maybe take a business course. That would be excellent, and I'd like to pay for it, if you're willing to accept." "William, let me finish. It's not charity, Ethan. It's an investment. You have the potential to be much more than just a restaurant manager. You could have your own chain of restaurants one day. You could teach others about humanized management. You could make a difference on a much larger scale." "Are you saying you want me to leave Grandma's Corner?" "No," William laughed. "I'm saying you can study while continuing to work here. There are night classes, weekend classes, and I'm willing to adjust your schedule to accommodate your studies." Ethan felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. No need to thank me, I'm the one who should thank you. For taking care of Elizabeth, for bringing me back, for giving me the chance to know my son. You gave me a second chance at life, Ethan." They hugged, a father and son embrace that carried years of unspoken love. In the following months, Ethan enrolled in a night business administration course. Balancing work and study was challenging, but he was motivated. Samantha, who also revealed aspirations for growth, decided to take the course with him, and they studied together whenever possible. Grandma's Corner continued to prosper. The fame of the social program spread, and the restaurant began receiving visits from journalists and even other entrepreneurs wanting to replicate the model. William and Ethan gave occasional talks on how to create businesses that are both profitable and socially responsible. Elizabeth became a sort of local celebrity. Her traditional recipes, which blended influences from Illinois with Portuguese touches she had learned from her father, were praised by food critics. She was invited to local TV shows, wrote a cooking column for a city newspaper, and was even considering writing a cookbook. Hannah excelled in school. She was an exemplary student, particularly talented in writing and literature. Her dream was to become a journalist, to use words to tell stories and make a difference. William had already promised he would pay for her college when the time came. And Catherine, strengthened by her recovered health and renewed sense of purpose, became a maternal figure for everyone at the restaurant. She was the one who comforted employees with personal problems, remembered birthdays, organized get-togethers. The restaurant was no longer just a business, it was truly a family. 1 year after the events that had changed everything, Grandma's Corner organized a special event. It was a celebration of the restaurant's anniversary, but also a celebration of everything that had been achieved, overcome, and built. The event was open to the public, with free food, live music, and a photo exhibition showing the restaurant's history from its founding 40 years earlier to the present. Ethan, now 26, was on the makeshift stage in the main hall, about to give a speech. He looked at the audience. Hundreds of people, some he knew well, others who were just regular customers, and many who had been helped by the social program. "Good evening, everyone," began Ethan, his voice steady despite his nerves. "It's an honor to be here today celebrating this amazing place. Many of you know the recent story of Grandma's Corner. You know about the changes, the challenges, the victories." He paused, searching for familiar faces in the audience. He saw William next to Elizabeth and Hannah in the front row. Catherine was a bit behind, smiling proudly. Mrs. Ruth, Jimmy, Samantha, and other employees were scattered throughout the room. But today I want to talk about something that goes beyond a restaurant. I want to talk about kindness, about second chances, about how small gestures can change entire lives. Ethan told his story. He talked about the day he saw a shabby woman shivering from the cold and decided to help. He talked about losing his job, about the struggle, about the despair. He talked about meeting Hannah and Elizabeth, about writing the letter to William, about all the twists and turns that followed. "I didn't know that giving a meal to someone would change my life," said Ethan. "I didn't do it expecting a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and that's the point. Kindness shouldn't be conditional. We help because it's right, because we see humanity in others, because we know that all of us at some point need help." There were people crying in the audience. Some nodded in agreement, others just listened, absorbed. Grandma's Corner is more than a restaurant. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we put people before profit, when we choose compassion over indifference. And that's thanks to all of you. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for believing that we can build something better together. The applause was deafening. Ethan stepped down from the stage and was immediately hugged by William, then by Elizabeth, Hannah, his mother, and so many others that they all blended into a collective embrace. The party continued through the night. There was music, dancing, plenty of food, and lots of joy. Ethan moved among the guests, greeting, thanking, listening to stories. It was near the end of the night when Samantha pulled him aside. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course." They stepped out onto the small back porch of the restaurant. The night was cool, the sky starry. "I want to thank you," said Samantha. "Thank me? Why?" "For inspiring me, for showing that it's possible to make a difference. I've decided that after I graduate I want to work with social projects, use what I've learned in business administration to help vulnerable communities." Ethan smiled. "That's wonderful, Samantha. You're going to be amazing at that. And I wanted to talk about us." Ethan felt his heart race. There was something between them, a connection that had grown over the months, but neither had spoken openly about it. "Us?" he repeated, wanting to make sure he understood. "Yes, Ethan, I like you a lot. Ethan, and I think you like me too. I don't want to pretend it doesn't exist anymore." "I do like you. A lot," Ethan admitted. "But I didn't want to ruin our friendship. I didn't want to complicate things at work." "Maybe some complications are worth it," Samantha smiled, moving closer to him. "Maybe so." They kissed there under the stars. while the music and laughter from the party continued inside the restaurant. It was a simple moment, but perfect. When they went back inside, Hannah saw them and grinned mischievously. Ethan gestured for her to be quiet, but he knew that soon the whole restaurant family would know, and it was okay. They were his family now, and families share joys. The following months were ones of continuous growth. Ethan graduated from his business administration course with excellent grades. William, impressed with his performance, began talking about expansion. Perhaps opening a branch of Grandma's Corner in another neighborhood, maybe creating a training institute to develop other managers with the same human-centered philosophy. Elizabeth published her cookbook, which became an unexpected success. Sales were so good that she began planning a second volume. Hannah, now 15, started writing for the school newspaper and dreamed big about her future as a journalist. Catherine got married again, to everyone's surprise and delight. She met a kind widower named Robert during one of the restaurant's activities, and the two fell in love. It was a simple but beautiful wedding, held at Grandma's Corner itself, with all friends and family present. And Ethan and Samantha officially started dating. It was a solid relationship, built on friendship, respect, and shared values. They were already talking, albeit timidly, about a future together. Throughout this time, the restaurant continued to be a beacon of hope in the community. The social program helped dozens of people get back on their feet. Stories of transformation became common. Someone who came in needing a meal and left with a job. Someone who arrived alone and found a community. Someone who came without hope and left with plans for the future. There were challenges, of course. Not everything was easy. There were financially tough months, staff situations that needed resolving, moments of doubt and exhaustion. But through it all, the family at Grandma's Corner remained united, supporting one another. It was on an ordinary Tuesday morning, nearly 2 years after this whole journey began, that something extraordinary happened. Ethan was in the office reviewing supplier orders when Hannah rushed in, holding an envelope. Ethan, look at this." "What is it?" he asked, taking the envelope she handed him. It was an official envelope, with important stamps and seals. Inside was a letter from a national organization that recognized social impact projects. Ethan read aloud, "It is with immense pleasure that we inform you that Grandma's Corner has been selected as one of the 10 social impact projects of the year. Your initiative of combining profitable business with social responsibility has served as an inspiration for hundreds of other establishments across the country." He continued reading in disbelief. The restaurant would receive an award, be featured in national publications, and have access to funds to expand the social program. "I can't believe it," murmured Ethan. "We need to tell the others." They gathered everyone: William, Elizabeth, Catherine, the employees, even some of the regular customers who were in the restaurant at that moment. Ethan read the letter again, and there was an explosion of joy. Mrs. Ruth cried with emotion. Jimmy raised his arms in celebration. Elizabeth hugged Hannah, and the two danced around the room. William stood up, his eyes shining with pride, and made a toast. "To Grandma's Corner, to what we built together, to the proof that kindness and success can go hand in hand." "To Grandma's Corner," everyone repeated, raising their glasses. The award ceremony took place a month later in New York. Ethan, William, Elizabeth, and Hannah traveled to receive the award. It was the first time Hannah had traveled by plane, and her excitement was contagious. On stage, in front of hundreds of people, Ethan accepted the trophy and gave a speech that echoed everything he had learned in those 2 transformative years. He spoke about choosing kindness, about believing in second chances, about building community. "This award is not mine," he said. "It belongs to every person who works at Grandma's Corner, to every person helped by our program, to every customer who chooses to support a business that cares. And most of all, it belongs to a woman I saw shivering from cold on a sidewalk 2 years ago, because she was the one who taught me that a simple act of kindness can change the world." In the audience, Elizabeth was crying. Hannah held her hand, also moved, and William, the man who had lost years with his family due to pride but had now regained everything and more, smiled with tears in his eyes. When they returned to Chicago, they were welcomed as heroes. Local newspapers covered the story. TV shows invited them for interviews. Grandma's Corner became a case study in business schools, an example of how to do business consciously. But despite all the fame and recognition, the restaurant kept its essence. It remained a place where people were treated with dignity, where good food was served with love, where anyone could walk in and feel at home. Ethan, now 28 years old, looked back in awe at everything that had happened. From that desperate young man who had been fired for an act of compassion, he had become a recognized entrepreneur, a son who had finally met his father, a boyfriend in a solid relationship, a member of a beautiful extended family, and it all started with a meal. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 years after the day that changed everything, Grandma's Corner held yet another celebration. This time was special. William was turning 70, and Elizabeth had finally achieved her complete independence, having legally recovered all the assets that Richard had tried to steal, through a process that, with the help of good lawyers William had hired, was eventually successful. The party was big, with people from all corners of William's life. Friends from Ireland, acquaintances from his years building the restaurant, new friends he had made since his return. There was music, dancing, plenty of food. In the middle of the celebration, Ethan asked for attention. He was nervous, and Samantha at his side held his hand in support. "William, I wanted to say a few words," Ethan began. "For goodness sake, you're not going to make another long, emotional speech, are you?" William joked, making everyone laugh. "I'll try to be brief," Ethan smiled. "You came into my life when I needed it most, not just as a savior, but as a father. In these 3 years, you taught me about business, about life, about being a man of character. You gave me opportunities I never dreamed of having, and most importantly, you gave me a family." He paused, his eyes beginning to get moist. "But today, on this special day, I wanted to make an announcement. With your blessing and support, Samantha and I are getting married." There was a moment of silence followed by an explosion of joy. Samantha showed the simple but beautiful engagement ring that Ethan had given her. Hannah screamed with joy and ran to hug them. Elizabeth and Catherine were already crying with happiness. William stood up, hugged Ethan tightly, then Samantha, and said, "There's no better birthday gift than this. Welcome to the family, Samantha." The party became a double celebration, William's birthday and Ethan and Samantha's engagement. It was a magical night, full of love, laughter, and hope. Later, when the party was winding down and guests were starting to say goodbye, Ethan found himself alone for a moment on the back porch of the restaurant. He looked at the stars, thinking about everything he had lived through. William joined him. "What are you thinking about, son?" "I was thinking about that morning, when I saw that woman on the sidewalk. If I had just passed by, if I had let the fear of losing my job stop me from helping, none of this would have happened. But you didn't pass by. You chose to do the right thing. And I lost my job because of it. And you gained a family, a purpose, a life. Sometimes we lose small things to gain big things, Ethan. Do you understand that now?" Ethan nodded. "I understand. Every difficulty, every challenge had a purpose. Everything brought me here." "Exactly. And now look at what you're building. A marriage with a wonderful woman, a successful career, a family that loves you. You should be proud. I am. And I thank you every day for coming back, for giving me this chance. I'm the one who thanks you, for bringing me back, for giving me the opportunity to know my daughter again, to know my granddaughter, to know my son. You saved me as much as I saved you, Ethan." They stood there in comfortable silence, just father and son enjoying the moment. Ethan and Samantha's wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple but beautiful ceremony at Grandma's Corner itself, which had become the setting for so many important moments. Hannah was the maid of honor, wearing a dress that Elizabeth had made especially for the occasion. William walked with Ethan to the altar, a role that would normally fall to the bride's father, but Samantha insisted that it made sense for William to walk with the groom too, since he was the father figure Ethan had. It was a moving ceremony, with vows that Ethan and Samantha wrote personally, words that spoke of partnership, respect, love, and shared purpose. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, The room erupted in applause and cheers. The party was unforgettable. Mrs. Ruth prepared a feast fit for kings. Jimmy organized the music. Everyone danced, laughed, celebrated, and at the end of the night, when Ethan and Samantha were about to leave for their honeymoon, a week at a countryside inn in Illinois, Hannah handed them a gift. "It's nothing big," she said shyly, "but I wanted to give you something special." It was a photo album that Hannah had personally put together. It began with an old photo of Grandma's Corner from when it had opened 40 years earlier. Then it showed pictures of Elizabeth as a child working at the restaurant. There were photos of William, photos of Ethan before he met them, photos from the day William had returned, photos of the family growing and getting stronger. The last page had a recent photo of everyone together: William, Elizabeth, Hannah, Ethan, Samantha, Catherine and Robert, Mrs. Ruth, Jimmy, and the other staff. It was a family picture, in the most complete sense of the word. Under the photo, Hannah had written, "A family isn't defined just by blood, but by love, choice, and commitment. Thank you for showing me that." Ethan and Samantha cried when they saw the album. It was the perfect gift, capturing the entire journey that had brought them there. The following years were ones of continuous growth. Ethan and Samantha opened the long-dreamed-of second location of Grandma's Corner, this time in a more distant neighborhood that needed investment. They replicated the social business model, and success was immediate. Hannah graduated from high school with honors and earned a scholarship to study journalism at one of the country's best universities. William cried with pride on her graduation day, remembering how she was a scared and overwhelmed girl when he met her, and seeing the strong, confident woman she had become. Elizabeth became a well-known figure in the culinary scene of the Midwest. Her second recipe book was even more successful than the first. She began teaching cooking classes, not just teaching recipes, but also telling stories about resilience and overcoming. Catherine and Robert bought a small but cozy house near the restaurant where they hosted the family for Sunday lunches. It was a house full of love and laughter, a stark contrast to the years of hardship Catherine had lived through. And Ethan, now 30 years old, found himself in a position he had never imagined possible. He was co-owner of 2 successful restaurants, had a wife he loved, a family that supported him, and a purpose that went beyond simply making money. He and Samantha began giving talks about social entrepreneurship, about how to build businesses that generate profit while making a difference. Universities invited them to speak. Government programs consulted them about public policies. They became, without ever having planned it, references in a new way of doing business. But despite all the success and recognition, Ethan never forgot where he came from. Every week he set aside a few hours to work directly with the restaurant's social program. He talked with the people who came seeking help, listened to their stories, offered not just food but also hope and guidance. It was during one of these sessions that he met Marcus, a 40-year-old man who had lost everything due to addiction and bad choices, but was trying to rebuild his life. Ethan saw something in Marcus that touched him, a genuine desire for change, despite all the doors that had closed on him. Ethan not only offered meals, but also helped Marcus find a support program, get the documents he had lost, and eventually find a job. It was a long process with relapses and difficulties, but Ethan stayed by Marcus's side, just as William had stayed by his. 6 months later, Marcus was recovered, working, rebuilding relationships with his family. And he made a point of going to Grandma's Corner to thank Ethan personally. "You saved my life," said Marcus, with tears in his eyes. "No, Marcus. You saved your own life. I was just here to support you. But if you hadn't given me that chance, if you hadn't believed in me when no one else did, I wouldn't have made it." Ethan hugged Marcus, deeply understanding what he felt, because he himself had been there, desperate and without options, and someone had believed in him. It was a cycle of kindness that kept turning. Stories like Marcus's became common. Grandma's Corner was no longer just 2 restaurants. It was a movement. Other establishments began to adopt similar models. A network of socially conscious businesses began to form in Chicago and then in other cities. Ethan and Samantha were invited to write a book about their experience. They spent months working on the manuscript, telling not only the beautiful parts of the story, but also the difficulties, the challenges, the moments of doubt. They wanted to be honest, to show that doing good wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. The book was launched at an event at the original Grandma's Corner itself, of course. The whole family was there, along with dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the restaurant. It was a night of celebration, but also of reflection on the journey taken. During the launch, a journalist asked Ethan a question. If you could go back in time to that day you were fired for giving food to a woman on the street, would you do anything differently? Ethan thought for a long moment before answering, No, I wouldn't change a thing. Because that day, even though it was painful, was the start of something incredible. It was the day I learned that doing the right thing sometimes has a price, but that price is always less than the cost of doing nothing. It was the day my life truly began. But you lost your job, went through financial difficulties. Don't you have any regrets? Difficulties are temporary, but what I gained is permanent. I gained a family, a purpose, the certainty that I can make a difference. And more importantly, I gained peace of mind, because I know that when I look in the mirror, I see someone who acts according to their values, no matter the cost. Ethan's answer was captured on video and went viral on social media. Millions of people watched, shared, commented. The story of the young man who was fired for giving food to a woman on the street and how it changed his life touched hearts across the country. But for Ethan, the real impact wasn't in the view counts or the messages from people he would never know. It was in the small changes he saw around him. It was in the employee who decided to be kinder to customers. It was in the customer who decided to give someone in need a chance. It was in the student who decided to use their career to do good. They were small ripples, but together they created an ocean of change. On an autumn afternoon, 4 years after that fateful day, Ethan was in the office when he received an unexpected visit. It was Richard Thompson. The man who walked through the door was a shadow of the arrogant manager Ethan had known. Richard seemed to have aged 10 years in 4. He was thinner, dressed in simple clothes, his posture stooped. There was a humility in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "What do you want here?" asked Ethan, keeping his voice neutral. I wanted to apologize," said Richard, his voice low. Ethan remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I know I have no right to be here. I know I was terrible to you, to Elizabeth, to everyone. But in these past few years, after I lost everything, I had time to think, and I understood how wrong I was." "What happened to you?" "I lost everything. Friends, money, reputation. I had to start over from scratch in another city. I worked humble jobs, went through hardships, understood what it's like to be on the other side. And I regretted everything I did." Ethan studied Richard. He seemed genuine, but it was hard to forget everything he had done. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know, and because I need to ask for forgiveness, even knowing I don't deserve to be forgiven. I was cruel to you. I was even worse with Elizabeth. I destroyed lives out of greed and pride, and that haunts me every day." There was a long silence. Ethan struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to send Richard away, to say it was too late for apologies. But another part, the part that had learned about compassion and second chances, recognized the courage it took for Richard to be there. "Do Elizabeth and William know you're here?" "No. I wouldn't have the courage to talk to them. You were the only one I could, because you were just an employee I mistreated. Elizabeth and Hannah, I betrayed them in much worse ways. You should talk to them, not for you, but because they deserve to hear your apologies." "Do you think they would receive me?" "I don't know, but I think you should at least try. Carrying this burden isn't good for anyone. And who knows, maybe you all need this closure." Richard nodded, his eyes moist. "Thank you, Ethan, for hearing me out at least." "Richard, wait," Ethan called when the man was about to leave. "We all deserve a second chance. You did terrible things, but you're trying to be better. That counts for something. I can't speak for the others, but I forgive you." Richard began to cry openly. They were tears of relief, of remorse, of hope. Ethan didn't hug him, didn't comfort him too much, but he didn't throw him out either. Sometimes kindness is knowing how to find the balance between justice and compassion. After Richard left, Ethan stayed alone in the office for a while, processing the encounter. Then he picked up the phone and called William, telling him about the visit. "What do you think we should do?" asked Ethan. "I think we should let Elizabeth decide. She was the one who suffered the most at his hands. If she wants to talk to him, we'll support her. If she doesn't, we'll support her too." Ethan agreed. When he told Elizabeth about Richard's visit, she was silent for a long time. "Did he really seem sorry?" she asked finally. "He did. But I can't know if it's genuine or not. I don't know if I want to see him. I don't know if I'm ready. And that's okay. You have no obligation to forgive him or to talk to him. But maybe one day I'll need to do it. Not for him, but for me. To completely close this chapter. When and if you're ready, we'll all be here to support you." A few months later, Elizabeth decided she was ready. She agreed to meet Richard in a neutral place with William and Ethan present. It was a difficult conversation with many tears from both sides. Richard apologized deeply for everything he had done. Elizabeth expressed all the pain he had caused. In the end, Elizabeth said, "I forgive you, Richard, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to move forward without carrying this anger and hurt." It wasn't a reconciliation. Richard didn't become part of their lives again. But it was a closure, an end to that painful chapter. And for everyone involved, especially for Elizabeth, it was liberating. The years kept passing. Hannah graduated from journalism school and started working at an important newspaper, covering stories with social impact. Her first major article was, naturally, about Grandma's Corner and the social business movement it had inspired. Ethan and Samantha had their first child, a boy they named William in honor of his grandfather. The old William, now 75 years old, cried when he held his great-grandson for the first time. It was a circle completing itself, a new generation bringing hope and continuity. Grandma's Corner had expanded to 5 locations in different cities across Illinois. Each one maintained the commitment to the social program. Each one was a community center. Together, they fed hundreds of people for free every week, offered training opportunities, and created decent jobs. Ethan, now 35 years old, looked at everything he had built with a deep sense of accomplishment, but also with humility, because he knew that none of it would have been possible alone. It had been the work of a community, of a family, of people who believed it was possible to do business differently. One Saturday morning, Ethan took little William to visit the original Grandma's Corner. The boy was only 2 years old, but Ethan wanted to start early, teaching him about the family legacy. They walked through the restaurant, which was closed that day for a small renovation. Ethan told stories to his son, even knowing he was too young to understand everything. "See this place, William? This is where it all began. Here your great-grandfather worked his whole life building something special. Here your grandmother Elizabeth grew up learning to cook and to love people. And here your father learned that doing the right thing is always worth it, no matter the cost." The boy looked around with curious eyes, touching the tables and chairs. Ethan picked him up and pointed to a framed photo on the wall. It was an old picture from the restaurant's opening day 40 years earlier. It showed a young William next to his wife, who had passed away when Elizabeth was a teenager, both smiling proudly in front of the establishment. "This is your great-grandfather when he was young. He built all this with his own hands. And do you know what he taught me? That a business isn't just about money. It's about people, about community, about making a difference." Ethan sat down in one of the chairs, still holding his son in his lap. "Your name carries a responsibility, little one. William is the name of a good man, a man who made mistakes but corrected them, a man who put family above pride. I hope when you grow up you understand the weight and the honor of carrying that name." The restaurant door opened, and Samantha came in, smiling when she saw her husband and son together. "I was looking for you two. What are you doing here?" "Just spending time together, telling stories, building memories." Samantha joined them, and the 3 of them sat there in the comfortable silence of the empty restaurant. Through the window, they could see the street where, years earlier, a shabby woman had shivered from the cold, and a young employee had made the decision that would change everything. Sometimes I think about how everything could have been different, said Ethan. If I hadn't seen Elizabeth that day, if I had ignored her, if I hadn't given that meal. But you did see her, and you helped, and that made all the difference, replied Samantha. Yes, but you know what's most amazing? I wasn't special. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just gave food to someone who was hungry. Anyone could have done the same. But most wouldn't have. Most would have walked right by. And that's what makes you special, Ethan. Not the grand gesture, but the consistent small acts of kindness. Ethan kissed his son's forehead, and then his wife's. I want to teach our son to be like that, to see need and act, to choose kindness even when it costs something, to understand that every person we meet carries a story, and that a gesture from us might be exactly what someone needs to keep going. And we will teach him, together, like our parents and grandparents taught us. They left the restaurant shortly after, locking the door behind them. But the energy of the place, the memories, the legacy, everything remained. Grandma's Corner was more than walls and tables. It was a testament to what's possible when we choose compassion over indifference. Weeks later, there was a large family gathering at Elizabeth's apartment, now renovated and comfortable. Everyone was there. William, now physically frailer but still mentally sharp. Elizabeth, radiant at 62. Hannah, 21 years old and shining at the start of her career. Ethan, Samantha and little William. Catherine and Robert. Mrs. Ruth and Jimmy with their respective families. It was a Sunday lunch, a tradition they had established a few years earlier. The table was abundant, full of food prepared with love. Conversations flowed, laughter filled the air, children ran through the house. At one point, William asked for silence. Everyone stopped eating and looked at him. I want to make a toast, said the old man, raising his glass. At 76 years old, I look around this table and see everything that matters. I see family, I see love, I see purpose. I see mistakes and redemption. I see pain and healing. I see struggle and victory. His voice was choked with emotion. I made many mistakes in my life. I let pride keep me away from my daughter. I wasted years I'll never get back. But I learned that it's never too late to fix mistakes. It's never too late to choose love over pride, to choose family over resentment. He looked at each person at the table, his eyes lingering longer on Elizabeth and Ethan. Elizabeth, my dear daughter, you taught me about resilience. Even when everything was against you, you never lost your kindness. And Ethan, my son, you taught me that heroes aren't people in capes making grand gestures. They're ordinary people making small acts of kindness consistently, even when it costs them something. So my toast is this. May we all keep choosing kindness. May we keep seeing each other with compassion. May we never forget where we came from and how far we've come. And may we always, when we see someone in need, be the person who stops and lends a hand. To kindness, everyone raised their glasses. To family, to second chances. To Grandma's Corner, to love. The glasses met with a cheerful clink. And in that moment, looking around the table full of people he loved, Ethan felt a deep peace. He had found his place in the world. He had found his family. He had found his purpose. And it all started with a simple act, giving food to a hungry woman on a sidewalk. Sometimes, Ethan thought, we don't know the impact of our actions. We don't know how a small gesture can create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. We don't know who we're really helping, what stories those people carry, what invisible connections bind us. But that doesn't matter. What matters is doing the right thing anyway, helping anyway, choosing kindness anyway, because in the end, as William always said, we don't take money or possessions when we leave. We only take the memories of the people we loved and the lives we touched. The lunch continued through the afternoon. Then came the desserts Elizabeth had prepared, the coffee Catherine insisted on making her special way, the conversations that stretched on as the sun began to set. Hannah pulled Ethan aside at one point. Uncle Ethan, I'm writing a book. A book? About what? About us. About this crazy, wonderful family. About how a meal changed so many people's destinies. About how small acts of kindness create big transformations. And what will you do with this book? I want to publish it. I want other people to read our story and understand that it's possible to make a difference. that we never know the impact of our actions, that it's worth choosing kindness. Ethan hugged Hannah. It will be a beautiful book, and I can't wait to read it. When evening finally came and the meeting ended, Ethan carried little William, who had fallen asleep, to the car. Samantha drove, and Ethan gazed out the window as they crossed the city. Chicago at night was beautiful, with its shimmering lights reflecting on Lake Michigan. There was movement in the streets, people living their lives, each carrying their own stories, their own challenges, their own hopes. How many of these people, Ethan thought, were going through tough times at that very moment? How many were desperate, not knowing how to pay the bills, how to care for their family, how to keep going, and how many small acts of kindness could change those lives? How many simple gestures could make the difference between giving up and carrying on? He couldn't help everyone, no one can, but he could help a few. And if each person helped a few, if each of us chose kindness when the opportunity arose, imagine the world we could create. "What are you thinking about?" Samantha asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "I was thinking how lucky I am. Very lucky. Not just for everything I have now, but for learning early on that doing the right thing pays off. For having the chance to see the impact of kindness. You created that luck, Ethan, with your choices, with your character." "No. Many people helped me along the way. Elizabeth gave me a purpose without even knowing it. William gave me a family. You gave me love and partnership. Mrs. Ruth gave me information when I needed it. Even Richard, in a twisted way, gave me the freedom to start over. No one does anything alone." They arrived home and put little William to bed. The boy didn't even wake up, exhausted from playing all day with his cousins. Ethan stood there for a few minutes, just watching his son sleep, thinking about the future he hoped for that child. What kind of world would it be when William grew up? What challenges would he face? What choices would he have to make? Ethan couldn't control that, but he could give his son the right tools. He could teach values. He could show by example how to live a life with purpose. He could make sure William grew up knowing he had the power to make a difference. In the following months, something interesting began to happen. The book that Hannah was writing began to take shape, and she shared excerpts with the family. It was an honest and touching narrative, which didn't hide the difficult moments but celebrated the victories. An editor met Hannah at a lecture on social journalism and became interested in the project. He asked to read the manuscript and, impressed, offered a publishing contract. The book would be released the following year, with the title, The Meal That Changed Everything. But while Hannah worked on the book, life went on at Grandma's Corner, and with it, new stories unfolded daily. There was Olivia, a young mother who had escaped an abusive relationship and arrived at the restaurant with her 2 young daughters, with nowhere to sleep. The staff not only offered food, but also helped Olivia find temporary shelter, get legal assistance, and eventually rebuild her life. Today, Olivia worked at the restaurant itself and was one of the most dedicated employees. There was Mr. Walter, a 70-year-old man who had lost his wife and sunk into deep depression. He started coming to the restaurant not out of financial need, but out of loneliness. Mrs. Ruth adopted him as a friend, and gradually, with daily conversations and the feeling of belonging to a community, Mr. Walter found a reason to keep going. Now he was an active volunteer, helping others who were grieving. There was Madison, a teenager who had been thrown out of her home by her family when she revealed her sexual orientation. She came to Grandma's Corner at 16, scared and with no prospects. Hannah, who was 19 at the time, identified with Madison's pain and took her under her wing. With the family's support, Madison managed to finish her studies, entered a university, and was now a psychology student, with the dream of working to help young people in similar situations. Each story was unique. Each person carried their own scars and hopes, but the common thread was that all of them had found at Grandma's Corner not just food, but also community, support, and a chance to start over. Ethan documented these stories in a personal notebook, not to publish or show off, but to remind himself of the reason for all that work. On nights when he was tired, when the challenges of the business seemed too great, when doubts arose, he would open that notebook and read. and he remembered that every number in the financial spreadsheets represented a person. Every administrative decision impacted real lives. Every dollar saved or invested had the power to change destinies. It was on one of those nights Ethan was in the office late reviewing accounts that William appeared. The old man rarely stayed late, but that night there was something he wanted to discuss. "Dad, what are you doing here at this hour?" asked Ethan, concerned. "I need to talk to you about something important." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. From the seriousness in William's tone, he knew it was something significant. "I'm listening." William sat down slowly, his age showing in every movement. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about my future specifically. I'm 76, Ethan. I'm not going to be here forever." "Don't talk like that. Let me finish. It's not morbid, it's realistic, and I want to make sure everything is organized when my time comes." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. "The original restaurant, the building where it all started, is still in my name. When I'm gone, it will automatically go to Elizabeth, who is the rightful owner anyway. But the other locations, the ones you and Samantha opened, those are yours. I want that to be clear and documented. William, I didn't do this thinking about inheritance or property. I know, that's exactly why you deserve it. It's not about money, Ethan. It's about legacy. You took the dream I started and multiplied it, turned it into a movement. That needs to be recognized and protected." "You're scaring me. Did something happen? Are you sick?" William smiled. "No more than normal for someone my age. But I had a scare last week. A dizzy spell, nothing serious, but it made me think. Life is fragile, Ethan. It can end at any moment, and I want to make sure the people I love are protected and the work we built continues." They spent the next few hours talking. William shared his wishes for the future, his concerns, his dreams for the family and the business. Ethan listened, asked questions, offered thoughts and reassurances. When they finally said goodbye that night, Ethan hugged his father with extra strength. "I love you, Dad." They were words he had only recently started saying, after years of building trust and intimacy, but now they came out naturally sincere. "I love you too, son. Very much." That conversation marked Ethan deeply. In the following days, he found himself paying more attention to the moments with William, cherishing every conversation, every piece of advice, every shared laugh. Because it was true, nothing is guaranteed, and the people we love won't be here forever. This led him to a broader reflection on time and priorities. The business was doing well, maybe too well. Ethan found himself working more and more hours, taking on more responsibilities, always thinking about the next goal. It was Samantha who confronted him about it. "Ethan, when was the last time we took a day just for us? Just you, me, and William, without thinking about work?" Ethan tried to remember and realized he couldn't. "I know work is important. I know we're building something special, but we can't let it consume everything. Our son is growing up fast. Your father isn't young. We need to make the most of the time we have." She was right, of course. Ethan had become so focused on building the future that he was neglecting the present. "You're right, I'm sorry, I'll do things differently." And he did. He started delegating more, trusting more in the team he had trained. He reserved Sundays exclusively for family, no exceptions. He took a vacation, something he hadn't done in years, taking Samantha and little William to a beach house for 2 weeks. It was during this vacation, building sandcastles with his son while Samantha read a book nearby, that Ethan had a profound realization. Success wasn't measured only by how many restaurants he had or how many people he helped. It was also measured by these simple moments, by being present, by being a good husband, a good father, a good son. Balance was the key. And he had lost it temporarily, but he was happy to have regained it before it was too late. When they returned from vacation, refreshed and with renewed perspective, Ethan implemented changes in how he managed his time. He hired an assistant manager to share responsibilities. He set clear boundaries between work and personal life, and surprisingly, the business didn't suffer. In fact, it thrived even more because Ethan was making decisions from a place of mental clarity rather than exhaustion. The launch of Hannah's book happened at a grand event at the original Grandma's Corner. The place was packed with friends, family, media, and curious people who had heard about the book and wanted to meet the people behind the story. Hannah was nervous but radiant, wearing an elegant dress that Elizabeth had helped her choose. When the time came to speak, she stepped onto the small stage they had set up and looked at the audience. This book started as a way to process my own story, to understand how a scared girl caring for a sick mother could have ended up so well. But the more I wrote, the more I realized it wasn't just my story. It was our collective story. She gestured to include everyone in the room. It's the story of every person here who chose kindness when they could have chosen indifference. It's about second chances, about forgiveness, about the power of small gestures. And most importantly, it's about hope. Because no matter how dark the night seems, there's always the possibility of a better dawn. Hannah read some excerpts from the book, including the part about the day Ethan was fired for giving food to her mother. There were tears in many eyes when she finished. The book became an immediate success, not just in Chicago but nationally. People connected with the message of hope and transformation. TV shows invited Hannah for interviews. Schools asked her to speak with students. The book made the bestseller list and stayed there for months. But the most significant impact was personal. Hundreds of letters arrived from readers sharing their own stories of overcoming, people saying the book inspired them to make changes in their lives, to be kinder, to not give up despite difficulties. One letter in particular deeply touched the whole family. It was from a woman named Melissa who wrote, "I was at the worst point in my life when I bought your book. I had lost my job, my husband had passed away recently, and I was considering giving up on everything. But reading about how you overcame so many difficulties, about how a stranger's kindness changed everything, I found the courage to continue. Today, 6 months later, I got a new job. I'm rebuilding my life. And most importantly, I decided to volunteer at a local shelter. I want to be for someone what Ethan was for Elizabeth. I want to make a difference. Thank you for sharing your story. It literally saved my life." When Hannah read this letter aloud during a family lunch, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. It was tangible proof that her stories, her struggles, her triumphs were inspiring others to choose hope over despair. Time kept passing, as it always does. Little William was growing fast, starting to form complete sentences and showing a curious and gentle personality. Ethan saw so much of himself and Samantha in the boy, and also traces of his grandfather William. Elizabeth published her third recipe book. This one focused on comfort food and culinary memories. It was more than a cookbook. It was an autobiography told through dishes. Each recipe came with a story, a memory, a lesson learned. Grandma's Corner expanded to a 6th location, this time in the neighboring city of Evanston. The opening ceremony was special, with William cutting the ribbon despite his advanced age and increasingly fragile health. "I never imagined," he said during the opening speech, "that the little restaurant I opened over 40 years ago would become all this. 6 locations, hundreds of employees, thousands of lives touched. It's more than any dream I ever had." He paused, clearly emotional. "But what makes me proudest isn't the numbers, it's what we represent. We proved that it's possible to do business consciously, that profit and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, that each of us has the power to create positive change in the world." Those were his last public words. A week later, William suffered a stroke while sleeping. He was hospitalized immediately, but the doctors were clear. The damage was extensive. He had a few days, maybe hours. The family gathered at the hospital: Ethan, Samantha, and little William, Elizabeth and Hannah, Catherine and Robert, Mrs. Ruth, Jimmy, all those who were part of that extended family that William had helped create. William was conscious but weak, but he spoke with difficulty but made a point to say a few words to each person. To Elizabeth, "You were always my pride. Forgive this old fool for losing so many years. I love you more than anything." To Hannah, "You will do great things, my granddaughter. Never lose that passion for justice and truth." To Catherine, "Thank you for raising such a wonderful son. Thank you for forgiving me and giving me the chance to know him." To Ethan, my son, my greatest treasure discovered late. Keep doing good. Keep being the person you are and take care of everyone for me, okay? I will, Dad. I promise. To little William, who didn't fully understand what was happening, you carry my name, little one. Carry it with honor. Be kind, be brave, be the man your father is. And then, surrounded by all those he loved, William Stone closed his eyes for the last time. There was no drama, no agony, just a peaceful passing of someone who had lived fully, loved deeply, and made a significant difference. The wake and funeral were events that brought together hundreds of people. Friends of decades, current and former employees, people who had been helped by the social programs, regular customers, even competitors who respected William's legacy. Ethan gave the eulogy, struggling to maintain his composure. My father was a man of contrasts. He made significant mistakes in his life, but had the courage to admit them and correct them. He was harsh at times, but also incredibly kind. He built an empire but never forgot the people. He looked at the coffin, the tears finally falling. The greatest lesson I learned from him was that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to ask for forgiveness. It's never too late to do the right thing. He was over 70 when he returned to the United States to fix his mistakes. And in these last 6 years, he lived more fully than many do in an entire lifetime. Dad, thank you for coming back. Thank you for giving me the chance to know you. Thank you for teaching me about business, about life, about being a real man. I will miss you every day, but I promise to honor your legacy. I promise to continue the work you started. I promise to be the father to my son that you were to me in these last years. William's death left a huge void in the family. Each one dealt with grief in their own way. Elizabeth immersed herself in the kitchen, preparing recipes that her father loved as a way to feel connected to him. Hannah wrote articles and poems processing her pain. Catherine visited the grave regularly, talking to William as if he were still there. And Ethan worked, not in a destructive way, but purposefully. Every decision he made, every action in the business was a way to honor his father. He implemented new social programs, expanded the reach of Grandma's Corner, ensured that William's legacy not only continued, but grew. 3 months after William's passing, the family gathered for the official reading of the will. There were no surprises. William had left everything organized and clear. The original restaurant to Elizabeth, some properties divided between her and Ethan, education funds set up for Hannah and little William, and generous donations to various charities. But there was a letter, a final letter from William to Ethan, written weeks before he passed. Ethan read it alone at home that night, after putting his son to sleep. William's shaky handwriting filled Ethan's eyes with tears from the very first line. My dear son, if you're reading this, it means I've passed on. Don't be sad for too long. I lived a long life, and despite the mistakes, a good life, mainly in the last years, thanks to you. Ethan, you were the greatest surprise and joy of my final years. Discovering I had a son, getting to know you, working by your side, seeing you build a beautiful family. These were gifts I didn't deserve, but for which I will be eternally grateful. You have something special, my son, a genuine kindness that can't be taught, an integrity that is rare, a sense of justice and compassion that moves mountains. Never lose that. The world will try to change you, make you cynical, make you doubt. Don't let it. Keep doing good. Keep being the light in someone's darkness. Keep proving that it's possible to do business with conscience and heart. Take care of your mother. She made a mistake by hiding your existence from me, but she did an admirable job raising you alone. The person you are today is the result of her love. Take care of Elizabeth and Hannah. They are your family as much as I was. Support them, protect them, love them, and take care of Samantha and little William. You have a beautiful family. Don't make the mistakes I made. Be present. Say I love you often. Don't let pride or work keep you away from them. As for the business, you already know what to do. Trust your instincts. Trust the team you built. And always remember that Grandma's Corner isn't about food. It's about people, about community, about making a difference. I'm proud of you, Ethan, more than words can express. And if there's anything after this life, I'll be watching you, cheering for you, proud of every step you take. Live well, my son. Love deeply. Make a difference. With all my love, Dad Ethan read the letter 3 times, crying freely. It was sweet and painful at the same time. A farewell, a legacy, a final piece of fatherly advice. He carefully stored the letter in a special box where he kept his most precious belongings, and he promised himself that he would live in a way that honored every word William had written. The months turned into years. The pain of losing William never completely disappeared, but it grew softer, turning into a sweet longing and precious memories. Grandma's Corner continued to grow. A 7th location was opened, this time in Milwaukee, then an 8th in Madison. The socially responsible business model they had developed was now studied in universities. Ethan and Samantha received invitations to speak internationally about conscious entrepreneurship. Little William grew up and started school. He was a bright and gentle child who from an early age showed concern for others. When he was 5, he used his birthday money to buy blankets for people experiencing homelessness. When he was 7, he organized a school drive to collect food for families in need. "He has your heart," Samantha said to Ethan one night, watching their son sleep. "He has the heart of the whole family," Ethan corrected. "Yours, my mother's, William's, Elizabeth's. He is the product of all the love that surrounds us." Hannah became an award-winning journalist known for her reporting on social justice and human rights. Her second book, a collection of essays about inequality and hope in the contemporary United States, was also a success. She used her platform to amplify marginalized voices and tell stories that needed to be told. Elizabeth, now in her mid-60s, decided to partially retire. She continued developing recipes and consulting for the restaurants, but spent more time traveling, something she had always wanted to do but never had the opportunity for. She visited Ireland, where her father had lived, and felt a deep connection to her roots. Catherine and Robert enjoyed their retirement years traveling across the United States in an RV they bought. They kept in constant touch with Ethan, through video calls, sharing adventures, and remaining an active part of their grandson's life. Mrs. Ruth finally retired at 68, after almost 30 years working at Grandma's Corner. Her last day was an emotional celebration, with all current employees and many former ones attending to honor her. Ethan gave a touching speech about how she had been the backbone of the restaurant for so many years. "You weren't just an employee, Mrs. Ruth," Ethan said. "You were family. You were the person who nourished us not only with food, but with wisdom, love, and support. None of this would have been possible without you." Mrs. Ruth cried, hugged everyone, and promised to keep visiting regularly. And she kept her promise, showing up several times a week, not to work, but to talk, advise, and simply be present. It was on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was reviewing plans for a possible 9th location of Grandma's Corner when he received an unexpected call. It was from a hospital in another city. "Mr. Miller, we have a patient here who asked us to contact you. His name is Richard Thompson." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. Richard. He hadn't thought of him in years, since that brief encounter years ago when he came to apologize. "What happened?" "He had a serious accident. He's in critical condition. He asked to speak with you before any procedure." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." He informed Samantha, got his car, and drove to the hospital in the neighboring city. He found Richard in an intensive care room connected to multiple machines. The man looked like a shadow of his former self, thin, pale, fragile. When he saw Ethan enter, Richard's eyes filled with tears. You came." "I got the message. What happened?" "Work accident. I was working on a construction site and fell. The doctors say it might be serious. Very serious." Ethan pulled up a chair and sat by the bed. "Why did you ask them to call me?" "Because I have no one else, Ethan. I lost everyone when I lost everything, and you were the only person who gave me a second chance. You forgave me when no one else would. I needed to talk to you one more time." "What do you want to tell me?" Richard breathed heavily before continuing. "I want to apologize again. For everything. and I want to thank you. After you forgave me that day, I managed to start forgiving myself too. It wasn't easy. I had to work hard on myself, but little by little I became a better person. Where are you working now? In construction, as a bricklayer. It's honest, sweaty work, very different from what I was used to. But it taught me humility. It made me see how most people live. It made me understand how privileged I was and how I wasted everything. Ethan listened in silence. I don't know if I'll survive this, Ethan. The doctors aren't optimistic. But if it's my time, I want to go in peace. I want to know that at least I tried to fix my mistakes. Do you think Elizabeth and Hannah could forgive me someday? They've already forgiven you, Richard. Elizabeth did it a few years ago, Hannah too, in her own way. Forgiveness isn't about you deserving it, it's about them choosing peace over anger. They are better people than I deserve. Maybe. But you're trying to be better too, that counts. Richard closed his eyes, exhausted. Thank you for coming. It means a lot. Ethan stayed with Richard for another hour, until the man fell asleep due to the medication. Before leaving, he left his phone number with the nurse, asking to be informed about Richard's condition. On the way back, Ethan reflected on everything. Richard had been cruel, selfish, destructive, but he was trying to change. And if he could change, if he could recognize his mistakes and try to be better, then there was hope for anyone. Richard survived the accident, but was left with permanent disabilities. He could no longer work in construction. Ethan, upon learning this, offered him an administrative job in the restaurants. Nothing in management or a position of power, but an honest and dignified job. Richard accepted with gratitude and humility, and to everyone's surprise, he proved to be a dedicated and reliable employee. The people who worked with him noticed the genuine change. He was respectful, hard-working, and grateful for every opportunity. Eventually, Elizabeth agreed to meet him in person. It was an emotionally charged meeting, where Richard asked for forgiveness on his knees, crying openly. Elizabeth lifted him up and said, I forgave you a long time ago, Richard. Not for you, but for me, because carrying anger and resentment was hurting me more than it was hurting you. But I see that you've changed. I see that you're trying to be better. And that gives me hope that people really can change. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Richard never became an intimate part of their lives again. But there was peace. There was closure. And there was proof that even the most unlikely people can find redemption if they are genuinely willing to change. The years kept passing. Little William wasn't so little anymore. He was now 10 years old, an intelligent and compassionate boy who loved helping out at the restaurants on weekends. He knew all the employees by name, remembered stories of regular customers, and already showed natural leadership. Ethan watched his son with pride and a touch of melancholy. Time passed so quickly. It seemed like just yesterday that he was finding out he was going to be a father, and now he was raising a little human being who already had his own personality, his own dreams. One evening after dinner, William asked, Dad, why do we do what we do? Why does Grandma's Corner give food to people for free? Ethan looked at his son, seeing an opportunity to teach an important lesson. Come here, sit with me. William settled next to his father on the couch. A long time ago, when your father was younger, he saw a hungry woman on the street. It was a cold, rainy day and she was shivering. I could have ignored her, could have walked right by. But something told me to help. So I gave her a warm meal. And what happened? I got fired from my job because of it. My boss thought I was stealing. I went through tough weeks, no job, no money, not knowing what to do. That's sad, Dad. It is. But you know what happened next? That woman I helped was Grandma Elizabeth, and helping her that day started a chain of events that completely changed my life. I met my family, found my purpose, built all this. William processed the information. So, you helped someone and good things happened? It's not just that. We don't help expecting good things in return. We help because it's the right thing to do. But the truth is, kindness creates more kindness. When you help someone, it doesn't just change that person's life. It changes you too. And often, that person will help another, who will help another, and so on. Like ripples in water? Exactly. Like ripples in water. A small stone creates circles that spread far beyond the starting point. William stayed quiet for a moment, thinking. I want to make ripples too, Dad. Ethan hugged his son tightly. You already are, my son. You already are. The 10th anniversary of William's return to the United States, and consequently the complete transformation of Grandma's Corner, was marked with a big celebration. Although William was no longer physically there, his presence was felt in every detail. The event happened simultaneously in all 9 Grandma's Corner locations. There was free food for everyone, live music, exhibits telling the story of the restaurant and the people it had helped over the years. Ethan gave a speech broadcast to all locations. Today we celebrate a decade of transformation, a decade proving it's possible to do business differently, a decade where we've fed not just bodies, but also hopes. He paused, looking at the crowd of familiar faces. In these 10 years, we've served over 50,000 free meals. We've helped over 1,000 people find jobs. We've supported hundreds of families in times of crisis. We've created a community where every person, regardless of their situation, is treated with dignity and respect. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The numbers don't capture the smile of a child who ate a warm meal when they were hungry. They don't capture the tears of gratitude from a mother who found support when she needed it most. They don't capture the transformation of someone who arrived desperate and left with hope. Ethan felt his voice catch and paused to compose himself. My father, William Stone, started this restaurant over 40 years ago with a simple dream: to create a place where people could eat good food and feel like family. He achieved that dream and much more. And although he's no longer here with us, his legacy lives on. It lives in every meal served with love. It lives in every transformed life. It lives in each of us who carries forward his vision. So today, we celebrate not just Grandma's Corner. We celebrate kindness. We celebrate community. We celebrate the proof that every one of us can make a difference. Thank you to everyone who's part of this amazing journey. The applause was deafening. People cried openly. Employees hugged each other. It was more than a business celebration. It was a celebration of values, of humanity, of hope. That night, after the celebrations ended and most people had left, Ethan stayed alone in the original restaurant for a few minutes. He looked around, absorbing the history contained within those walls. He thought of William, the old man who had built all this with his own hands. He thought of Elizabeth, the woman he saw shivering from cold on a sidewalk. He thought of Hannah, the frightened girl who became a strong and inspiring woman. He thought of his mother, Catherine, who raised him alone with so much love and sacrifice. He thought of Samantha, his partner in everything. He thought of little William, the next generation who would carry this legacy forward. And he thought of himself, the desperate young man who had been fired for an act of kindness, who never imagined that difficult day would be the beginning of something so beautiful. "Thank you, Father," he whispered to the air, "for everything." He felt a deep peace, a certainty that he was on the right path, doing what he should be doing, being who he should be. The final years of this story were of consolidation and continuity. Grandma's Corner didn't expand much beyond the 9 locations. Ethan and Samantha decided to focus on quality instead of quantity, on deep impact instead of rapid growth. Each location became a vital center in its community. They weren't just restaurants, but spaces where people gathered, where lives were transformed, where hope was cultivated daily. Hannah's book was adapted into a movie. The premiere was emotional, with the whole family present. Seeing their story on the big screen, portrayed by talented actors, was surreal. But more important was the message the movie spread. Millions of people across the country watched and were inspired. William, the little one, grew up to be a remarkable teenager. At 15, he started his own social project at school, creating a tutoring program where older students helped younger ones. His dream was to study business administration and eventually work alongside his parents at Grandma's Corner, carrying the legacy to a 3rd generation. Elizabeth published one last book, this one not of recipes, but a complete autobiography. It was an honest and touching read about her life, her mistakes, her pains, her victories. It became a bestseller and required reading material in several schools, used to teach about resilience and overcoming. Hannah won important awards for her journalism, but what made her most proud weren't the trophies, but the letters from readers saying her reports inspired them to take action, to make a difference in their own communities. Catherine and Robert continued traveling and living fully, a living example that it's never too late to start over and find joy. And Ethan woke up every morning grateful. Grateful for the family he had, for the work he did, for the lives he touched. There were difficult days, of course, challenges kept appearing, but he faced them with the wisdom accumulated over the years and the support of a strong community. One Sunday morning, 20 years after that fateful day on the sidewalk, Ethan was at the original Grandma's Corner, preparing for his son William's special birthday lunch, who would turn 18. While helping decorate the hall, he saw through the window a scene that made him stop. A young employee from a nearby establishment was giving food to a homeless person on the sidewalk. Ethan smiled. The ripples kept spreading. He didn't know that young man, didn't know his story, but he knew that somewhere, somehow, the message of kindness was being passed on, person by person, act by act, ripple by ripple. And he realized in that moment that this was the true legacy, not the restaurants, not the awards, not the fame, but the shift in mindset they had helped create. The living proof that choosing kindness is worth it, that each of us has the power to change lives, that small gestures have big impacts. William's party was joyful and memorable. The young man's lifelong friends, extended family, restaurant employees, all gathered to celebrate. During the party, William asked to speak. "I want to thank everyone for being here, but mainly I want to thank my parents. You taught me, not with words, but with actions, what it means to live a life with purpose. You showed me that success isn't measured by how much you have, but by how many lives you touch, by how much good you do in the world." The young man looked directly at Ethan, his eyes shining with determination and love. "Dad, you always told me the story of how it all began, of the woman on the sidewalk, the meal, the layoff, and you always end by saying it was just luck, but it wasn't luck, Dad. It was a choice. You chose to be kind when you could have been indifferent. And that choice changed everything. It changed your life. It changed Grandma Elizabeth and Aunt Hannah's lives. It changed the lives of thousands of people helped by the restaurants. And it changed my life, giving me the best example a son could have." There wasn't a dry eye in the hall. "So my birthday wish isn't something for me. It's a commitment. I commit to continuing this legacy, to being kind, to making a difference, to proving, through my actions, that choosing good is always worth it. Always." The applause was thunderous. Ethan hugged his son tightly, proud beyond words. Samantha joined the hug, then Elizabeth, Hannah, and soon the whole family was there, united in love and shared commitment. That night, after everyone had left and the family was home, Ethan stayed up a little longer. He went out to the small backyard, looked at the stars, and felt a deep connection to everything he had lived through. 20 years. 20 years since that day on the sidewalk, and look where they had ended up. He thought of all the people who had crossed his path. Some had stayed, becoming permanent parts of his life. Others had passed through briefly, but left indelible marks. Each one had contributed to the person he was today. He thought of the challenges overcome, the tears shed, the victories celebrated. He thought of the moments of despair when everything seemed lost, and the moments of joy when everything fell perfectly into place. And he thought of the simple choice he had made 2 decades ago, giving a meal to a hungry woman. If he had known then everything that choice would set in motion, would he have done the same thing? Absolutely yes, because it wasn't about the results. It was about acting according to his values. It was about seeing another human being in need and responding with compassion. That was what mattered. That was what he hoped he had taught his son. That was the legacy he wanted to leave. Ethan went back inside, went to the room where Samantha was already sleeping. He looked at his wife, the partner who had been by his side through everything, and whispered, "Thank you for sharing this journey with me." Then he went to his son's room, opened the door slowly so as not to wake him. William was sleeping deeply, now almost a man, but still his boy. Ethan stood there for a moment, just watching, feeling immense love. "You're going to do amazing things," he whispered. "You'll take this legacy further than I ever could, and you'll do it your way, with your own voice, your own style. I'm already so proud of you." He closed the door slowly and went to his own room. He lay down next to Samantha, who murmured something sleepy and snuggled against him. And there, in the comfortable darkness of their room, surrounded by his family's love, Ethan Miller felt deep gratitude for every moment of his journey, for the hardships that made him strong, for the joys that made him whole, for the people who had touched his life in big and small ways. It had been an incredible journey, and in a way, it was still just beginning. Because the legacy wasn't something static, stuck in the past. It was something alive, growing, evolving, passing from generation to generation. The meal he had given on the sidewalk 20 years ago had created ripples that would continue spreading long after he was gone. Through his son, through the thousands of people who had been touched by Grandma's Corner, through all who had heard the story and decided to make a difference in their own communities. This was the true power of kindness. It didn't end. It multiplied. It grew. It inspired. It transformed. And as Ethan slipped into sleep, his last conscious thought was one of deep and complete peace. He had lived well, loved deeply, made a significant difference. He couldn't ask for anything more. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this journey? From where are you listening to us? If this story touched your heart, share your honest reflections with us in the comments. Would you do the same as Ethan did on that rainy day? Leave your like, it helps us a lot, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories celebrating kindness and overcoming. Your companionship means everything to us. Thank you so much for being here.